Sweet.
So it's Scott Langford from the Gen Global Educators Network at Stanford. And I'm here today interviewing a former Foothill College student. I'm a professor of English at Foothill College. And I'm interviewing former Foothill College student transferred to Berkeley and now has moved on to other ventures that we're about to hear all about, Nick Shafer. So Nick, tell us about your latest project, please.
Yeah, no, proud owl and proud bear through and through.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess what we've been working on for the last 5 months or so, actually not even 5 months, but 3.5 months at this, I guess. At COVID time gets a little kind of blurry around the
I
edges.
call it the before times.
Yeah,
We knew each other in the before times.
I'm just
That's
trying
when
to
you
guide
combed
my
your hair too.
Exactly. You can track the passage of time purely by the distance from the last barber. But yeah, no, so we're working, basically, as you mentioned, I went to Foothill 2016, 2017, transferred to Cal 2017, and then majored in anthropology and Arabic. And then through a whole bunch of just lucky advice and lucky mentors and some hard work, got into a couple of programs like the Wrangle Scholarship, which paid for me to go to Jordan this last year, fully on US government dime. They invested in us kind of to get more Arabic language skills specifically, but then just generally critical languages and study abroad experience for
That really started at Foothill because you were the first community college student ever to go on the Ibrahim Fellowship, right?
Yeah, the Ibrahim. I'm actually still a trip leader for them.
Yeah,
So
exactly. But you were the first break. This was what, this is 4 years ago, or something like that.
that was 2017, so it was right before.
So you were still at Foothill College, and you got, in short form, you got a journalism fellowship that it was a wonderful, amazing journalism fellowship that took you all over the Middle East at their expense and gave you all kinds of experience and training, but it had never been awarded to a community college student before. And it's not because they didn't want community college students, it's because community college students weren't connecting with these networks. So if you went to Harvard or Berkeley or Stanford, then everybody knew all about it. And they said, hey, Nick, you should apply for this thing. And so they were like in the usual little like closed bubble circle of everybody comes from Columbia and everybody comes from Yale and Stanford and Berkeley. And that's it. And this is what ever since then, you've been working on busting this down. So I'm giving you my history list.
Yeah. So the Ibrahim program was one of the first kind of breakthroughs that I had kind of within the scholarship space, I guess. And it was fantastic. And Mark Rosenblum, who's the director of the program, is still a really, really close friend. And I work really closely with him. And also it's also not just journalism. It's also more focused around just like experiential education within the Middle East. So it's focused on bringing in young American scholars and people who are interested in the Middle East to the region to meet with activists, politicians, journalists, everyone kind of across the spectrum in Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, Oman, and the UAE. In a month. So it's a blitz of a program. You basically go between like 5 weeks and you bounce between 5 different societies. It's kind of experiential. A believer in experiential education's absolute dream.
And I like to tell the story about, so Nick was my student, was a student in the Honors Institute at Foothill College. So he was taking English 1A honors and whatever other honors we took together. And then the summer comes and I'm getting like these late night like 3 o'clock in the morning text messages. It's me, Nick, I'm in Jordan. I need this. Or like, what do you think of that? And right? Or like I'm driving, I'm like in the back of a truck and we're trying to cross the border and like this. So it was unusual for a community college instructor to be getting these kinds of messages.
Well, and that was also kind of so the Ibrahim program ran from May until June. And then I actually stayed because my flight was paid for by the program. So I actually stayed in Tel Aviv and studied intensive Hebrew. So I studied Hebrew there for about because at the Vritz, maybe I think it was 6 weeks. And then spent some time basically hitchhiking and backpacking around the West Bank and Palestine, and had a great time. So it was a really unique experience that wouldn't have been afforded if I hadn't been through your advocacy and Catherine Maurer and other people in the Foothill ecosystem hadn't written those letters of recommendation to the program. And if I hadn't learned about it by happenstance, I learned about it through a friend at University of Chicago who just happened to say, hey, Nick, this sounds like something interesting you should apply to.
Yeah, that's the thing, because thank you for the credit to Foothill College. Happy to write your recommendation letters, but this was not on anybody's radar.
Yeah, and
So
that's one of the
now,
biggest.
now if I see young journalists, I say, hey, you should apply for this program because we have had a couple. Now we've had more than one person from Foothill go, right?
Yeah, Danya. So Danya Deeb, and then
Document,
also Naomi. So
right. So
um,
we're
or
right.
Liza. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
Liza.
yeah, so exactly. So Liza went, and Danya went, and Nick. So we've really been. It's been an amazing journey. So now that people know that this goes back a couple of years, now I want you to talk about this amazing vision that you have to make this a reality for community college students across the United States. So in other words, Nick was able to pull this off first for himself, just through a combination of talent and luck, and a little lucky networking. Had a fantastic experience, was then able to help some other Foothill students become part of this amazing program. And now the question is, can you scale this
Mm-hmm.
so that it's not just a few people who happen to know Scott Langford or who happen to know Nick Shafer or who happen to, right. So how do we do this for community college students across the United States to give them this kind of
Absolutely.
international
Yeah, and
opportunity?
this is
Am I
one.
right about this? Like, this is really,
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
was this tiny seed that grew now into this gigantic thing. And it's bigger than even I know about now, which is why we're doing this interview, because I don't even know what's been going on because everything's been going crazy from whatever it was 4 weeks ago that we last talked.
Absolutely. And that's a really good grounding, because I think that also my story is not exceptional in this. There's so many, as you know, anecdotally, through your career at Foothill and working with bright young community college students and returning students and student parents and people that come through CCs at every stage of life. People ace it. Like, people knock it out of the park. They end up in
Yeah,
places, and you see this statistically. Like, I only know the stats at Berkeley, but they average, on average, people on have higher academic GPAs. They do
right.
perform better at Berkeley, have higher graduation rates than four-year students.
And people
But
forget
for
that 30% of the undergraduates at Cal are transfer students.
transfer students,
And
and
and just as
especially,
exactly as you're saying, the people that
yeah.
did 2 years of community college perform better in their last 2 years of Cal on the whole than the people who started there as
And
freshmen.
that is not a diss, or that is not an attack on people who do go through 4 year schools. It just goes to
No, that's
show the
fine, but it's not.
resiliency.
But it's
Yeah,
also to say the stigma is, oh my God, you're from community college, you'll never survive here.
exactly.
Well, actually,
Well,
quite the opposite. I'm doing quite well,
actually, quite well,
right?
and you have mutual solidarity networks. It's like, I know, like, my partner at Berkeley, Danish Ozarella, like, she was one of my best friends at Berkeley, and she was a transfer student. One of some of my best friends, folks like Marcus Lasso, William Gudanietz, Isabel, all of them were transfer students, and
Well,
that
we
they we
know these
had.
little secrets. Like 2 out of 3 of my dissertation advisors at Stanford were former community
Well, it's a
college
completely
students.
open
Like
secret.
it's like this little thing. Like, as a gay guy, we used to say, like, if a pink triangle would just appear on the forehead of every queer person on the planet, problem solved, including like half the Republican Party. Sorry for that. But, um, but
Yeah,
honestly, if a little CC would appear on the forehead of everybody who was a former community college student, whether you happen to be the governor or Arnold Schwarzenegger or whoever it was that you might, whether you're Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, the founders of
yeah.
Apple, whether you're Craig Ventnor, one of the great founders of the genetics engineering industry here in the Bay Area, like, all this stuff
Um,
comes
yeah,
back
and I
to
think
us.
these
So
stories,
we're totally into the destigmatization thing there.
well, and these stories, like one of your alumna who you connected me with, Brooke Alviar, right? So she, I wrote this great op-ed in Yale Daily News about talking about how Foothill College and kind of how she went from valedictorian in high school to Foothill
Yeah.
College and transferring to Yale. And, like, for perspective, I mean, I think Yale's doing a bit better now, and it's on a scale of, like, I think 20. They took 20 last
Yale
year.
will eventually catch up with Foothill College.
Well, and this is actually one of the interesting things that we're working on. And, like, there's some really great alumni networks, and great transfer students like Ryan Liu, who went through Pasadena City College and then transferred to Yale also about, like, I think 4 or 5 years ago now. And then, like, went on to Cambridge to do work in his master's on global education and education advocacy, and then is now at Yale Law. And so there's an interesting nexus at Yale that's evolving. And then with a good friend of mine, Rayano Samir Palumbo, who, like I mentioned, he's not a transfer student, but a huge advocate for low income, first generation spaces at Yale.
Yeah.
And then there's also, so Yale's an interesting case study that can talk about later.
Yeah, because the point with Yale was like, yes, I'm so glad they're here now, but they were kind of late to the game, right?
Well, and so Stanford, yeah, and Stanford, like, and I don't know the statistics and institutional conversations on this, but Stanford's been doing a better job of like looking at
Yes.
how, and integrating the community stories from Foothill College, other community
No,
colleges.
they're trying. They're trying
Um,
harder. We are trying harder because that's one reason that Global Educators Network exists, because Stanford's trying to do a better job of supporting and empowering community college faculty. And then the
yeah,
cool thing is here you come along, and some of the other people I want to interview with this amazing way to also simultaneously empower the students, which then empowers me to help you too,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, and so that's kind of where, and that's a great segue for me to talk a bit about what we've been working on. So essentially, a group of us back in, I'd say like late April, early May of this last year, to this COVID landscape, we decided to basically to organize, and so we launched a project called the Global Community College Transfer Network, GCCTN for short. And our website's going to be going online soon, and we have a core team of about 5 people who are all working. We're working like 10 to 20 hours a week, kind of part-time, probably more than the 10 hours, if I'm being honest. But we're pulling together through volunteer labor and organizing all of us. Pulling together a website, database of scholarships, fellowships, internships, collecting blog posts, highlighting stories of community college students from all around the US who have gone in, and we have issues kind of from a critical theory perspective of saying that kind of things that are like the Yales, the Stanfords, the Rhodesies, all of these things, the Fulbrights, that those are actually important enough that we should use as metrics for success. But like Brooke talked about, they are a place, they do give you more of a voice when we're having this conversation about destigmatizing community college pathways and showing to broader society that, yeah, people that come from CCs have a lot of benefits and that there's a lot of both, not alone, leave aside the financial benefit of CCs, but even educational benefits. And people cite for decades after they've come through community colleges, the ways that they formed them, gave them resources, and across the spectrum. And that's including like New York Times has had some really good op-eds they published in the last year, 2 years about the changing community college landscape, growing middle class and upper middle class people that are going through community colleges, how important community colleges are for collective kind of integration and collective social uplift, economic uplift.
Well,
And
and
that's,
here we are
yeah.
in quarantine, COVID quarantine times, and we're getting a lot of that attention too, because
Mhm.
it's people are staying home.
Yeah,
So maybe your community college is closer than it used to be if you were flying off to your dorm.
exactly.
So let me ask you to. So what are we calling this organization? So this is where we get to the update point. We're still kind of like reviewing what
Yeah.
Dr. Scott over here knew from the last time we talked. So you've been in the process of forming an organization, giving it a name, giving it a presence, giving it a web presence, all these kind of things. So let's do the part that we had originally planned even before we pushed record, which is catch me up on what's been going on with your organization. What are you calling
Yeah.
it?
So we're calling it the Global Community College Transfer Network, GCCTN. It's a mouthful. It might
I
change, but
like I see it pairs well with Global Educators Network, doesn't it?
it does. And well, that's also the two sides that we're working on here. Is so personally, this also be my personal background is in international relations, international affairs, foreign affairs, language education. There's a lot of very competitive grants out there for global education, language study, public service, both on like the margin, things like the Rhodes, the Marshall, the Mitchell, and then also things that are less competitive, still competitive, but not as kind of selective, like the Boren Scholarship, the Critical Language Scholarship, the Gilman Scholarship, which requires you to be a Pell Grant recipient. And for a lot of these programs, especially within the international relations and language study space, community college students are eligible. They just don't know they're eligible. They just don't know that there is like, yeah, you can apply to the Gilman. Are you a Pell Grant recipient? Yeah, you can get $6,000 to go pay for your study abroad while you're at CC. And so that's something that we are really hoping to change a conversation about, to create a network where people can go to say, hey, I really do want to go do study abroad earlier in my community college career. And what's really interesting about this is a lot of the institutions that are offering scholarships and are hiring people that do these scholarships. For example, the Boren, I'll use that that's a very illustrative example. The Boren is funded by something called NSEP, which is National Security Education Security. You know what? Actually, I won't say the acronym. I don't actually have it on top of my head. But it's basically funded by the US government, taxpayer dollars, to try to fund 6 to 10 months of foreign language education and study abroad experience for Americans that then in return you have to work for the US government for 1 year. later down the line. And that includes giving you Schedule A hiring priority and basically a back door into federal jobs. So if you say, we actually have a whole separate job board, you can go talk to people and you can be pulled into government jobs very easily. And so for someone that that wants to go work in foreign affairs, be a diplomat, work in the development landscape, any of the parts of international relations, the Boren is an excellent program because not only do you get funded to go and study abroad and have a really awesome to learn to get like that extra bump in your Arabic or your Russian or your Hindi or your Korean or your Japanese or Mandarin, you also have the opportunity to study abroad, and you have hiring priority on the other side. And the Critical Language Scholarship, which is a summer fellowship, works the same way. And community college students
Yeah,
are
in fact, let me jump in to say, like, this is from a community college, a lifelong community college professor's perspective. This is all the stuff that students deserve at a community college but don't have, the insider knowledge. Say, like, students,
yeah,
of course they want to study abroad. Of course they want to study abroad in a way that leads to a job somewhere, right?
yes.
But they
Well,
don't have the insider knowledge, they don't have the resources, and they don't have the idea that this actually could lead to employment, right?
Exactly. And
And
so these are the
you're
two
actually
things.
giving three incredibly valuable things to non-traditional students who have been marginalized, which is what community colleges are all about. And that's why I love this project, because it's kind of a triple threat, right? Like, if you say, oh, you could go study in Amman, well, but how do I pay for getting there? I can hardly get on the
Exactly.
bus, right? And so here are these amazing resources, and the Boren Scholarship is just one perfect example, where if you come from the kind of family that might know that these things exist, then you don't even, you know that you might want to ask those kinds of questions. Or
Yeah.
maybe somebody knows somebody that knows somebody, but you don't know these kind of people. If you come from if you're a first gen student, you don't know people like this, right? You don't even know that any of these things exist. Then you think, well, I could never possibly pay for it, not recognizing that somebody's going to hand you a beautiful all expense paid scholarship if you can earn it, right? And then you can say, well, what would I do with that? Well, hey, you could have a whole career coming out of this thing.
Yeah. And
And
so
this is,
that,
by the way, on your website, I have edit, since I'm an English professor, but I don't think this is just for language students alone, right? I mean, I think it's great for language students. I think business students need global experience. Poli-sci students, sociology students, it doesn't matter what you're studying. Science is a global enterprise, especially now, right? So I actually think that these kinds of programs are amazing springboards for a huge variety of students at a place like Foothill College that I can guarantee they know nothing about.
exactly.
Right? And
And
that's what you're all about. That's what you're all about, and that's why it's so exciting.
well, and so you kind of hit the nail on the head there, that there's two parts to this that I'll kind of go from what you just brought up to add in here. One is that these are careers, right? That study abroad builds up cultural and social capital in ways that are not tangible. And like, maybe it's the anthropology major in me that really puts emphasis on that. But the study abroad is an economic skill set, right? That global education in an increasingly globalized world where more and more people are on the move. I mean, I did my graduate seminar at Berkeley on tourism, my final year. 10% of global GDP is just on tourism. It's the largest, it's the largest willing flow of capital in human history. Is tourism. And like, it's things like that seem so innocuous and things that we accept today, but is really the underpinning of what a global economy looks like. Not just, and tourism is an illustrative example, but everything, global supply chains. We have to be able to think and talk globally and interculturally. And these things, and this is where this is important, is these are marketable skills. And community colleges for a long time have been focused on how do we, because they do serve two-year populations and people that do not go on to the Berkeleys and the elite institutions or SJSUs or anywhere else in CSU or UC system, they also train people to be plumbers and EMTs and people for our traditionally defined vocations. But generally, especially the case if you're a first-gen low-income or American underrepresented minority, but then also just more generally, we don't have literacy in the American population for what does IR look like. Doesn't matter, like, even if you're in like my own background, like kind of middle class, kind of my dad's an engineer, like my mom like studied public health, but they don't do anything in international relations. So even when I was starting this, even with college educated parents, it wasn't a topic of like, what does a diplomat do, right? What does a career in foreign affairs look like? Well, how do you define a vocation built around cultural competency built around languages. And so what part of what we really want to be doing is making that case. And so we're connecting with, and on top of, in addition, because this is also with this project specifically, this is part of a much broader patchwork of destigmatizing community college pathways, getting more CC students in these opportunities. It's also about how do you connect the recruiters within this space, State Department, for State Department, the USAID, the intelligence community, all of the hiring pathways for better or for worse that exist, and they will give jobs and pay for people's undergraduate degrees, even in some cases. How to connect those folks with community college students, because at the end of the day, that whole ecosystem still has huge diversity challenges that they're really confronting. There was a report actually even before everything started happening with George Floyd, and I hate to say silver lining with a man's life, but one of the silver linings of this moment and this cultural and political moment are these institutions internally are really grappling with kind of how do we have this persistent inequality that has remained deeply rooted. And like today, retention at the State Department for American underrepresented minorities is worse than it was under Bill Clinton's term. And
well, and I'll add that, like that regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democratic administration, but this bubble thing, like, you know, I'm a Stanford guy, you're a Berkeley guy, like this bubble thing where everybody comes from the same 5 universities is disastrous. There's no roots within communities across the country. There's not the richness of thinking that comes from a multicultural environment, right? And it's like we're cutting ourselves off from our richest sources of cultural knowledge within the United States because everybody comes from the same 5 universities. Well, and I'm happy to be a Stanford grad and you're happy to be a Berkeley grad, but like we do not have a lock on what the heck's going on in the world or in our country or in our communities. So they need us as much as we need them. And that's exactly what you're saying. I just wanted to really underline that, right?
Well, and that's one of the things.
There's a desperate need for diversity within the sort of IR communities. And that it's weird, but it's true that like that's what's going on. And then there's the economic diversity of it also, right? Yeah. If everybody comes from upper middle class and higher backgrounds, don't have the on the ground knowledge of what it's like not to be from wealthy families.
Well, and that's also why community colleges are a very exciting kind of target, or a very exciting kind of part of that, because even though, as you know, like they're very, very diverse, especially ones like Foothill that are embedded in wealthier kind of communities that have a lot of local donors, that have a lot of resources, a lot of local kids also go there. They are very vibrant, right? And like people, they're very vibrant, they're extremely diverse, and they're a very good, not stand-in, but when we're having these conversations about structural inequality and access to resources, there's a division between private elite schools, public schools across the board, and then CCs and CSUs, et cetera, or their peer schools. And so that's something that we really want to be working on and trying to make that argument by highlighting these stories through blog posts, through webinars, both of successful transfer students, of quote unquote successful, of people who have kind of fit into these paradigms of what American kind of normative assumptions about the American dream look like, to make the argument like, yeah, there are transfer students that are Rhodes Scholars, there are transfer students that are Marshall Scholars, there are transfer students that are Fulbrighters, there are transfer students in PhD programs, there are transfer students that are just kicking ass in their respective fields. And that does something that when you suddenly look at a community college, not as a place that people that couldn't cut it go, right? Or like that people that, for lack of a better word, that didn't get that 1% lottery ticket to get a full ride scholarship to a 4-year school, right? That population is not the one that we should be basing conversation about the American dream on. And if we actually are talking about having a reinvigorated American experience, the community colleges are one of the bedrocks of that. And it's like, I'm approaching that from my back. I'm going to be working at USAID as a John Gardner Fellow this next year. And I've been able to access a lot of these language education programs. So I'm approaching this specifically from, because of my contacts and network are within international relations and the employer landscape of international IR. I'm approaching this project from that perspective, but the other folks that I'm working on are working in different parts of it. Leah Yen, who is she's an incoming Marshall Scholar from UCLA, went to El Camino College. she and I have been working really closely on this project, and she works in digital humanities, right? She's not working in like the government side at all. Marcus Lasso is another like great transfer, original New Yorker, went to Santa Barbara City College, transferred me to Brookcal. We met there, good friends. He's going to complete a master's in Germany, or sorry, Belgium, in Belgium and Poland as an Erasmus Mundus scholar, fully funded. And there's tons of stories like this of people who are working in different corners, not just of public service. And that's something that we do believe, though, that we want to make a case for, is saying, how does this intersection between public service, and for me, that is in IR, international relations, et cetera, but that manifests differently for many different people, and all of these scholarships and these grants that people want to give, and like through conversations with State Department, IIE, American councils, they want to recruit community college students. I remember like Michaela, who's the diplomat in residence at University of California, at Berkeley, is a State Department employee, diplomat, who works there. She says she's tried for a year to basically reach out to community colleges. And because they're so decentralized, there is no kind of, every community college is different. The politics of every campus is different. The question of who you speak with is not really clear. There's constant conversation challenges. And so what we're hoping to do is serve as a bridge, primarily from the student side, to say students can come to this program, or come to this website to access webinars with recruiters for scholarships and employers. There will be a blog post that will be highlighting the stories of community college students and graduates who have gone on to other things and different things, showing kind of what incredible pathways can wait for people on the other side.
In fact, I was actually thinking, why don't we can pause the recording for a second.
Yeah.
And let's screen share your website that you've been working on.
So actually, well, I think like the website actually is not quite ready to go yet.
Not quite ready for public view yet? Okay, that's all right.
Not quite yet. I think we're going to be putting a lot of finishing touches on this week. I mean, I can pull it up in its current form, but it's still rough. So
I don't know. I thought it was, I mean, I think partly what I want people to know is that like, this is not just an idea with no implementation. Like, you've already got a board of directors, you've already got an advisory board, you already have built a team, you're already in contact with a number of international and national major agencies. And I think your website already makes that clear. So I understand that it's kind of like not quite ready for prime time in some ways, but since the point of this interview is to get people excited, and since hopefully people will be watching this as the weeks and months go by, I think showing what you have so far, because it's way more than I could have dreamed. I mean, you essentially had the idea for this project 6 months ago?
Last through May. So
okay,
like,
so a year. Okay,
April.
I'll give you the whole year. This is the thing, but that was in the before times, so you get extra credit.
Oh no, I meant April 2020. So it's been about like 4 months.
Yeah, so it's been a couple of months, and like, it's amazing what you have been able to pull together, way beyond anything that I would dream that you could accomplish. But this is the thing. The community college transfer students are among the most accomplished leaders that we have, period. And you're really showing that. So as long as you're comfortable with it, I think we should screen share it. I don't know.
We can.
You need time. You need time. Can you find it on your little?
Yeah, I have it right here. I can screen share, but with the caveat that, like, I think especially our partners page is all under. We're figuring out kind of exactly how we're going to be partnering, and like the internship and scholarship fellowship database. Everything is under.
Yeah, I can even run a little scroll when we publish it.
Okay.
It's a draft only, not for public consumption or something like that.
That'd be great.
And we can always edit this out later. But I have to say, when you sent me the link, I was blown away by how, like how much you had already accomplished.
Yeah. Well, so what I can do is I can just walk.
You got more than Global Educator Network has on their website right now. I'll say that. Like, so let's full disclosure. You're making us look like we need to hurry up and get busy.
All right. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the landing page here. So we have a nice animation there about it's a link from a video about diplomacy. So if you scroll down, the landing page makes an argument of why global education, kind of what is international relations, how do we're couching our language in the language of scholarships and in the language of IR, because these are very tangible things, especially when we're talking with other stakeholders. It makes this conversation about destigmatization work and the broader picture tangible, and something that we can make bring to various stakeholders and make a coherent argument. So everything we've talked about already about the bigger argument about the role for CCs, we're not really making conscious here yet. We'll probably will do that through our blog posts, but on the website, we're focusing much more narrowly on here's opportunities. Here is an argument of kind of how a specific area that community college students can get more representation in and people want to give resources in. So here in this area, we'll be listing our partners, which are all, again, as I said, very kind of, we've had conversations with folks from everywhere, from state, USAID, some people at Berkeley, the John Gardner Fellowship Association, which is joint between Berkeley and Stanford, that I'm a part of as well. I'm a current John Gardner Fellow, and so hoping to do something there with Stanford and Berkeley alumni. But then here we're going to be hosting, putting our webinars. So we'll be having webinars with people from everyone from, let's say, Christian Tanja, who is a recruiter for the Schwartzman Scholarship, himself a UCLA graduate, who's very, very into a lot of questions of equity. And the Schwartzman actually has done a fantastic job of recruiting people, like, for example, Jesse Marks from the University of Florida, who's a transfer student, and that they've done a lot of really good cutting edge work on how do you get community college experiences reflected within scholarship review processes. And that's something I'm very passionate about as well. I've shot a lot of shots at these kind of scholarships about how do you actually talk about community college. So we'll be having talks from folks like himself, who's an actual recruiter. He works for the Schwartzman Foundation. He works for the Schwartzman Scholarship, who will talk about that specific opportunity, and then generally just about how to talk about community college experience within those application processes. We'll have people from the State Department, hopefully UN, like professionals within foreign affairs that use kind of global cultural linguistic capital within their careers to kind of give that argument of does this look like on the other side. And so we'll be having a lot of people there, and hopefully educators as well. Then down here, we have our contact us form, just a simple kind of getting contact. Here is kind of the other bread and butter. Here's the bread and there's the butter of what we're doing. So the bread is...
I love your animations, and they're actually very eloquent as a way to communicate what's going on. So I think you should let them scroll for a little while. Like, again, I realize it's all under development, but I thought, as a communications professional, which I'm supposed to be, I thought this was an amazing way to communicate, right? Like they're quite remarkable in terms of trying to give a visual narrative about what this means in a really super engaging way. So it does make an argument, even though it's also incredibly visually appealing and sort of fun and sort of cartoonish, but like, wow.
Well, that's one of the challenges is oftentimes the explaining about what these kind of careers, like how do you explain what a diplomat does, right? You are a representative of the United States, but you also talk to people, you're an advocate for Americans overseas, you're also like thinking from a foreign policy perspective, but then also a very like grassroots local level perspective. And how do you even capture all of what skills you need for those kinds of careers? It's hard. And so we were definitely thinking about that consciously as we were moving through the process, the design process. So as I was saying, so the bread here is the scholarships and fellowships. We have a little bit of just a conversation here about like, what is a fellowship? CC students probably don't know what a fellowship is, because how would any of us have ever encountered what a fellowship is before?
Such a point worth re-emphasizing. Like I just had this conversation with one of my favorite students, and this whole idea, like, what is a fellowship? It sounded like, what? Fellowship of the Rings. Like, I'm female, can I get a fellowship? Like, yeah. And again, it's like one of the best students I have, but she doesn't come from a family where anybody does any of this stuff. Well, she's a first-gen student. Yeah. There is no knowledge about this vocabulary.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that we were very conscious of, that especially like all of us who have had these experiences have kind of cut our teeth by trial and by fire, of learning how to move through this ecosystem, access this ecosystem, learn about opportunity, is how do you put yourself back in those shoes, right, of where you were 5 years ago, 4 years ago. And so we were very conscious. A guiding ethic for us as we're thinking about our communication is starting at those basic terms of like a simple thing that if you go somewhere, like let's say we're at Stanford, like if you're very exposed to what the ideas of a fellowship is through the advising strength, the strength of the advising team, like that is just there. And that's a result of organization, dollars, staff members, focus, that you don't have at the community college level. And so we were very clear that we wanted to make that argument as say, like, just even have a short paragraph, not assuming that everyone knows all these terms, but saying, what is a fellowship? Kind of what is a study abroad program even? what is international relations? And so this is something that we are consciously kind of making out throughout this whole website. So this, as I said, is one of the bread and butter. So this is where we're creating a database. These are all stand-ins right now. We haven't imported the data yet. I actually fundraised money for to pay interns. So we actually have 5 interns, one from Foothill actually, Naomi, who's a undergrad, an international student actually from Indonesia. But we have 5 people, one from Pasadena, who just transferred to Berkeley, one from BCC, one from Chabot, another one from De Anza. Also just transferred to UCLA, I believe. And so all of these 5 interns are actually collecting, paying them, because unpaid labor is like the bane of every single student life and should be completely abolished. But yeah, so they're currently collecting data on scholarships, fellowships, and internships that are opportunities for community college students that then they can be here. You can put in here, say, I think we have the drop-down menu. Like you can look up topic, funding, like the requirements, like first year, second year, location, like Bay Area, DC, overseas. And so you can just go through this. So hopefully our current data set is around, we have about 200 scholarships and fellowships we've indexed. And we will hopefully have around 500 internships or more.
So you're only up to 200, right? So this is where you always make me feel like I don't get anything done in the morning and I don't get out of bed, Nick. So like,
no,
oh, that's not quite ready yet. We're only having conversations with the State Department and so on and so forth. And we only have about 200 fellowships listed so far. And we only have like 6 or 7 active tabs on our website in construction. And like, we do have quite a bit of like really amazing animation, but like, but it's like, we want to do more. I'm just giving you a gentle tease about
well, no, but the
it's
thing
great.
is though,
Like, because you've only been working on this like the last couple of months, and it's amazing. And by the way, you've already fundraised, so you can have 5 interns. Wow, you work at hyper speed.
So see, this is the thing though, is that I think 2 things that made this project unique on that front was, one, it doesn't feel like work because we're all passionate about this. And one of the things, like, for everyone that comes to the community college landscape, we all want to pay it forward. We all want to give it back. And we want to kind of come back into the institutions that we care about. And especially when George Floyd happened and when all of the kind of conversation in an election year about what kind of small things can we do to make a small change in the status quo of kind of how the ecosystem works. There was a whole group of us, Marcus, Leah, Jasmine Stoltzfus, Camille Bismonte, a whole bunch of people that I've been working with really closely, that this wouldn't be possible without them. And we are very consciously, even though I'm kind of the one cracking the whip and kind of getting everyone organized, and we're very conscious that we want to have a flat organization where all of us really are building this network, because it is a network. And as and this isn't really clear yet on the website, but one of the things like that we also want to do is create mentorship and have peer-to-peer mentorship. If you go here to the resources page, we are ultimately planning to have a peer-to-peer mentoring system where we'll basically have people who are mentors, who are people who have gone through community college, are professionals working in global education, yeah, and that they'll be able to sign up here, and then we'll be able to get assigned mentees so that we can create a mentorship system to have that, just having someone who can answer questions like, what is a fellowship? Like once a call every month, right? To like give like work on a work in progress document to help keep people aware of what's out there. And just anecdotally, we already have about 20 people who have signed up to be mentors, who are transfer students that I know personally, people in our network know personally. It's been word of mouth so far. But there's been a lot of people.
There you go again. You got 20 people signed up. It's great. I'm just the cheerleader here, but it's amazing how fast you've accomplished this. And I love what you're saying about like the moment, the Black Lives Matter moment, the Black Minds Matter moment, the moment in which our nation is literally going through convulsions of the survival of democracy. Like the urgency of it means that like, it's so heartening to me to see what you've accomplished so quickly. And I totally get what you mean. Like there's a real urgency now that maybe we should have always had, but it is making people come together for really positive change like this. And so thank you so much. And it's really practical and it's really on the ground. It's not just a vision statement. Like this is all the nuts and bolts is really amazing.
Yeah, and it's really gonna be fun to see where we go from here. And so we have a lot of ideas, like webinars, for example, like I was explaining before. We'll be able to register, get a Zoom link. to talk, to hear from these folks. We'll probably have open office hours where like someone will say, hi, like I'm Hazim Hardiman, and I was a Rhodes Scholar from Jersey, or from Philly, sorry Hazim if you watch this later, from Philly, who is like, went to Temple and then went on, like, what is that like, right? And he was a first gen low income student of color, and like, how did he navigate that process, and how does he continue to navigate that process into what's after that? Because there is no, like, one of the biggest challenges of CCs is people scatter. And there is very little kind of sense of cohort aside from individual people. So that's one of the other things that we want to do here, is show that for many of us, community college is still, even if we're working years down the line in professional spaces or other graduate programs or transferred on to some fancy big name school, community colleges are still part of our identity, and we feel passionately about giving back to them. And so activating these alumni networks of people who have done it, and activating alumni networks to create cross-community college peership is another thing that we feel really passionate about. And that actually is one of the other tasks that we are having our interns do. This is, I'm showing you to the plumbing right now, kind of part of what we're doing. But we're building actually a cross-state database of community colleges. So if you look here, oh, Marcus, sorry. Can you see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, so you can see here, so this is just for California CCs, for example. And so what we did is we tasked our interns basically with finding all of everything from scholarship advising, study abroad advising, career advising, language departments, political science departments, basically everyone who was relevant to a mission of international relations, scholarship recruiting, and kind of opportunity advising, right? And so we started with identifying California, Florida, New York, and Texas. And so as you can see here, our interns, like, bless their hearts, this would be possible without them. And if they watch this, like, for you guys are making this happen, they're going through and getting all of these contacts for every single community college and four-year school in everywhere in the United States. Because what we want to do is not have this be a coastal node. We don't want to have it just be here in the Bay Area or in the New York area or in New England, in Boston. Where a lot of these, like, there's so many, like, we know between Stanford and Foothill, right? Like, going to Foothill is a very different experience from going to Shasta, because of the type of experience you have being a rural student versus an urban student, and benefiting from informal networks and peer networks between, like, Stanford and Foothill, for example. And so we're hoping to collaborate. There's this fantastic organization in Texas called the CCID. It's the Community Colleges for International Development, which does a lot of pedagogy. Jen should definitely take a look at them.
Yeah, I'm taking a note on that. That sounds really interesting.
Well, and so their website is here, and they're based in Texas. So they're based in Texas, and they've done their membership is primarily a lot more in the Midwest and Southwest and South. But that's also a really good thing. And so they have, so they tons of partnerships. They have a conference every year that they organize on global education and community colleges. And so they have a very, very well-developed program that would be great for Jen to connect with, and we're hoping to connect with too. Oh, you got a screenshot of my disorganized desktop there.
I'm getting all this because we're on Zoom record, which is great. And I want to say this is a project that Jen has to work on really hard too. I mean, just in the genesis of the genesis of the Global Educators Network, in the genesis of your organization, you have to start somewhere. So you started with a lot of contacts in the Middle East. You had your State Department contacts, the people that you knew from Cal, the people that you knew in the Bay Area because you're a Bay Area guy, right? Mm-hmm. But I just want to call out again what a brilliant job you've done in terms of already taking this national and international in ways that, so like, just because it starts in the Bay Area doesn't mean it has to be coastal only, right? Like you say, the coastal enclave thing, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have to contribute to the disastrous flyover state stigma that is also something that this country really needs to unplug.
Absolutely.
Right?
And there's brilliant transfer students that are on the forefront of this. So I'm thinking of like folks like Catalina Wedman, who she's a current Wrangle scholar. So she's so the Wrangle Scholarship is a fantastic opportunity with the State Department, where they fully pay for your master's, fully fund your master's program, tuition, living, everything. And then you have assured employment with the State Department for 5 years afterwards.
Wow.
So basically, it's a educational backdoor into the State Department.
Yeah, that's a dream.
It's fantastic, and it specifically targets people who are American minorities and people who are underrepresented, socioeconomically represented, underrepresented as well, within the foreign service. And so, like, that's an opportunity which, if you learn about it, and the way that a lot of people learn about, especially in places like Kansas, right, about these opportunities, is through scholarships. It's through like doing something like because the reality is opportunities compound. And I think part of the reason why a lot of transfer students struggle with what's post 4 years is
Right.
because opportunities compound, social capital compounds, cultural capital compounds. So I was lucky enough that I was able to afford studying abroad before coming to Foothill. And so I did that. Was able, because I had a family that was able, and I had the interest and a background to pursue that, we were able to support that experience for a summer in Morocco in 2016. Um, but that's not something that everyone can do. And so for me, I became exposed to what is the Arabic scholarship landscape like by having that experience and studying with people at a language school in Morocco who were on those opportunities, which is where I learned about them. But if for people, I'm mentoring someone at Shoshana Abkhazar right now, who's a fresh transfer to Berkeley, one of our interns who I just mentioned, who is coming from, I believe, Pierce College down south. And she's Moroccan American, is very passionate about women's issues in Morocco, about kind of body image issues in Morocco as well, mental health, and has wanted to study Arabic for years. And she just transferred to Berkeley, but because there was no Arabic coursework, because of slash budgets, of no funding for things like Arabic at the community college level, she now is looking at she's wanted for years to study Arabic, and it's central to kind of the field she would love to work in, is passionate about. But now she's going to Berkeley. She has 2 years. She's going to spend her units taking the intro level Arabic class. When you're paying so much per unit to actually, it's a hard balance. And so trying to get that cultural and study abroad capital and language experience earlier in the pipeline, so then students are transferring to 4-year schools, like Stanford, like Berkeley, like anywhere else, any school. So then they are competitive. Because a lot of these programs, for example, the Bourne and CLS, they require you, before you're eligible, to have studied a language for a year. So, or have equivalent. So one of the things one of the challenges, if you, for example, in her situation, she's not eligible to apply to the CLS or the Boren because she didn't have the opportunities in community college to study the language. So then she's coming as a junior, which is normally when you would traditionally have these experiences, and not able to access them because she didn't have the experience earlier on. And so there's a lot of really, really interesting stuff happening here. I'm going to highlight another great organization called Dex, run by Dex Burns. It's called First Trip, which is the entire purpose is exactly what it sounds like, to basically get students from untraditional backgrounds, also with like low GPAs.
If you want to pull this up on your screen, I'm fine with that. So.
Sure. Yeah. So First Trip, Dex is fantastic. He launched his own NGO. I think 2 years ago. And so this organization is fantastic. It's based in DC. They have a great, lovely little video here. It's fantastic. And so what they do is they basically get students overseas. They do micro grants to students to defray the cost of study abroad for a first study abroad, with a particular focus on non-traditional students who otherwise wouldn't have had the chance to study overseas. And so it's people like Dex and expanding that mission to a lot of donors and institutions like Stanford and other foundations, where we're also currently having a conversation among ourselves with GCCTN about how we want to organize. So we've been playing with ideas because we're dealing with a bunch of different stakeholders here, and we are student oriented and student directed. But we are dealing with universities. We are dealing with people at State Department, professional employers. We are dealing with scholarship providers. And so we're very aware that we want to find a home that we can synthesize all of these things in, that we can find a home that we can, kind of workshop all of these different organizations and groups together. And so we're currently playing with the idea. We're planning on filing as a 501c3 at some point, hopefully. But the problem with the 501c3, as I'm sure Scott, that is a lot of oversight. And there's a lot of you have to do minutes, and you have to have, the board is very clearly defined. And there's a lot of advantages to remaining unincorporated, or kind of as a operating as a passion team. So we're figuring out kind of how we want to move forward, like legally and explicitly. We're having internal conversations about that. But I think this just all goes to show just how many people are out there that are really wanting to work in this space and make a difference. And it's incredible. I mean, the warmth that we've received from places that are traditionally seen as impenetrable, like the State Department, for example, where they say, we want community college students. We want people who will come from more diverse backgrounds to enter into our ranks. And they've just struggled for years to kind of, how do you actually close institutional loops to get people earlier in these pipelines into these areas of recruitment. And I know I've talked about State Department a lot. That's just an illustrative example of a much broader, we're also talking about PhD recruitment. We're talking about the museum sector. We're talking about kind of everything that a global cultural education engenders and is useful in, which is at the end of the day, just about everything.
Well, and this might be a good place to kind of start to wrap up, because that's the vision. I have to say, I have always thought of the State Department as impenetrable. So I think it's a great illustration. It's also, again, that you're building from your own knowledge base, and then you've built a network, and then now you have interns, and you're networking really successfully with a number of organizations for support. And that's I know that's on the to-do list too. I hope you hear in my voice the passion project. I think this can be a passion project for many different organizations coming together to really leverage this. We have this moment. History has given us this moment. And we have a team thanks to you, right? And who better to introduce community college students nationwide to these kinds of unbelievable opportunities than community college students who have already themselves benefited from them and who are giving their time and their passion to it now. I mean, you're paying your interns, but your organizational team is just people like you who want to help out community colleges. And thank you from the heart, right? Like, another problem that community colleges have, as you say, we all scatter, students scatter, and we haven't leveraged the incredible power that we have in our own alumni, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm also very excited about this as a way to showcase and harness and leverage the power of community college students nationwide. Mm-hmm. Because this started out as a joke, and now it's not a joke with me anymore. Like, my Stanford network is very powerful, right? As somebody who had the privilege to go there, and again, on a scholarship with fellowships, with all that kind of stuff that I had no idea about, right? Mm-hmm. Even from my middle-class family, I didn't know what a fellowship was until Stanford handed me one, right? Like, really, what? You'll pay for me to go there? Like, seriously? Right? I still remember the moment. I think my eyes still get all pie-eyed about it. And I love that the cultural capital does accrue. But the beautiful thing that I've been learning as 30 years into my community college life as an instructor is that the cultural capital that you get from these generations of incredibly talented and passionate students like yourself can also accrue. We just have to have platforms that allow them to come together. And again, in this particular cultural moment, like, if we can get everybody to sign up for your organization that wants to be part of it on LinkedIn, then you can push a button on LinkedIn and it shows you everybody that does it. The same way that if you don't think that there's a lot of community college students at high levels in some place like Apple, go to LinkedIn and you can find that out. Like, how many Foothill College students are working at Apple? It's astounding, right? Yeah. And we lose track of them. We don't even know ourselves, but LinkedIn has given us this tool. So suddenly we have platforms that are coming together, including Zoom, where we are right now, right? We don't have to fly people from all over the country. And so I feel like that we're really there. So that's my kind of close up, just partly because it's so empowering and heartwarming and puts me back with some passion to work on these things. Thank you so much for the passion that you've given it. And I think those of us in Global Educators Network will do whatever we can to help and assist and partner and ally with you in this, because we are mainly focused on community college educators, right, mm-hmm. in the United States. But I don't have to tell you that the number one mission of every community college educator is our students. And that's not always true at four-year institutions and R1s and all that, right? So I feel like this is such a win-win on both sides. Like, this is what we created this organization for on our side, and you're why we're here. So let's partner up as we move forward.
Well, and that's, I was like, have my closing comment there, building right off of that, is that I, at Berkeley, all of my best friends, for the most part, were transfer students. That everyone, we have that student focused approach at CCs where really the entire product is the student. It's not about research, it's not about other interests, it's not about everything else. It's about purely how do you cultivate the individual? How do you create education to kind of help improve their life? And that looks different for different people. For some people that means becoming an EMT. For some people that means going on to a PhD program future down the line, right? For some people that means just getting your BA and then getting the stamping that and going on. And that diversity of experience and that focus on student outcomes, I think, and I mean this sincerely, really marks transfer students, because when they then go into these institutions that have a lot more diverse interests, have a lot more different stakeholders, have to balance research prerogatives with politics, with student outcomes. There is a solidarity network, an unspoken solidarity network between transfer students. And I think that's one of the things, because I did exactly what you said. I went on LinkedIn and typed in like, who, like what, bro, like Wrangle Scholars Community College, right? Like da 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 da. And you find people all over. I've talked with tons of people that are working in high levels in the State Department, in parts of the U.S., parts of U.S. kind of foreign policy and international affairs, the UN, Mercy Corps. The list goes on and on. And I think that just if we could figure out a way to capitalize on those feelings, that one of the big selling points of a private 4-year tuition is that you buy in a network, right? You buy in a brand, you buy in a experience. And on the one hand, educational outcome is one part, but as we already talked about in the Berkeley situation, community college students that are allowed to transfer these institutions and are able to transfer into these institutions and admitted into these institutions oftentimes actually outperform on an academic basis students that come from a 4-year background and admit as freshmen. And so then this gets into a much bigger conversation about how do we create the same kind of network externalities that exist at schools like Stanford or Yale or private schools or Berkeley, even to a certain extent, actually a high extent. How do we democratize that and get people to realize that, oh, wait, community colleges themselves, not the places that community college students end up, are also hubs for these kind of conversations, these networks. And so ultimately we're really hoping to do is, like, of course, like all of us are, we're busy, and so we don't have time to have one-on-one mentoring calls, but through doing things like open office hours and holding webinars, and having like, yeah, I'm going to be online for an hour and a half, open Zoom room, anyone can come in and we can talk and just have a conversation. That kind of mentoring and that kind of access to formalize a network that we can hopefully at some point have on a website. Be like, hey, you want to go find community college students that elected into a database across the 90 nation that was like, yeah, I work at State Department and you're a community college student, says I'm interested in international affairs. You can then get that person's email, right? And simple things like that that exist at Stanford or Berkeley to a lesser extent. It's a bit more too big. And we want to be a small part of building that network and building that kind of, I don't like, not class consciousness, but building that consciousness of what community college alumni networks can do for each other further down the line, because there's a lot of folks that are professionals and still care. And so this is not, like, as I said, we're just in like the beginning stage of this by focusing on a database of scholarships and fellowships and internships and doing webinars with recruiters. So we're just at a very kind of specific corner of that broader mission. But I think that hopefully as this project goes on, and I'm also thinking about through graduate school, actually also at Stanford for their graduate school of education program, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, that this is something that I think is going to be worked on, and there's people all over the country that really would love to see it. And there's all of these nodes, Gen in the Bay Area, CCID in Texas, people like Dex is doing this first trip project in DC, and that it's just a matter of getting everyone to actually talk and coordinate. And how do you actually build a movement around community colleges that can empower them and empower their alumni to connect? And so ultimately that's what we hope to do, and hopefully by also giving opportunities to people at community colleges and transfer students, yeah, as they go on and build their own
And
culture.
thank you so much. I mean, I kind of hijacked you today. So I think we should wrap up now. Like, so
Yeah.
probably, poor Nick, like I just said, hey, let's catch up a little bit. And the next thing you know, I'm like, let's do this on Zoom so that we can record it, because you've been doing so much and I need to take notes and I'd love to write this up, which I'm still planning to do. And I would like to do whatever I can to help you, but thank you for just taking like an hour out of your day for running all of these visions and plans. I will push this out on our Global Educators Network. I hope that it's a useful thing for you as well. But the whole point is, like, this is just the beginning. This is the beginning of the beginning. And so to be continued is really where we want to stop, in a way. Like, this isn't, like, this project is only a few months old. It's incredibly exciting. It's still evolving. Everything that we're talking about is still in a sort of amorphous. And the same thing is true of Global Educators Network, by the way. So we're in exactly the same position, except that your website looks better than our website at the moment. So I got to fix that. But one of the things that I am passionate about doing is continuing these kinds of interviews with students like you. Just happen to be, again, in this historical moment where previous Foothill students are starting several incredibly exciting nationwide organizations, or working in international indigenous conservation projects and winning global awards, and et cetera. So you're kind of the first of my student interviews, and thank you for being hijacked and ambushed. Thank God you didn't have time to make yourself, now you look like a student because you are, or a former student, and that's fine, because that's what we want. We can check back with you again, maybe in a few months, and do a follow-up interview. And I think that would be really exciting as well. All right.
Sure.
So thank you, Nick, for your time and passion.
Thank you, Scott, also for the opportunity. It's great to see you again.
All right. That's fantastic.